Welcome, my friend, to Next Level Change Success. I'm Therese Perez, a change strategist and practitioner with over 20 years of experience designing and delivering impactful change programs across various industries. In this podcast, I share real-world practical strategies to help you create and deliver positive change experiences, whether you're a leader, practitioner, or someone looking to bring new ways of working to life. In today's fast-paced world, change is constant. Here we focus on how you can put people at the centre of your change strategy, because people with a sense of purpose are the most important link in driving performance. So if you're ready to create meaningful change and achieve all the success that comes with it, keep listening. Together, let's change the conversation and take it to the next level. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Next Level Change Success. My name is Therese Perez and I'm the founder of myvirtualchangemanager.com. I'd like to acknowledge that I am recording on Tharawal country and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which I am recording today, and to elders both past, present and emerging. So today's episode is about language and the language that you use when it comes to change, the beliefs that you are showing and the values that you are displaying to people through the language that you use, and having your awareness raise around that reality that as you're communicating with people, you are expressing your core values, and that can either have people engage with the change or not. It can have people engage in workshops or not. And whether it's yourself, the organisation, the language you're using in your written communication, as well as the leaders and the language they're using when leading the change, that all impacts the ability for people to engage. And you might have experienced it yourself. You might have consciously or unconsciously alienated people through a change because of the language that you use and your own ability to flex and adapt your language to the organisation that you're working in, to the teams and the peoples that you're working with, can make the difference around your change success. A simple example of this, and if you heard about at the Eras Tour, Swiftie concerts with Tay-Tay, that as she went globally around the world, she in every single country changed and used the local language when singing one of her songs, where her dancer in every single country, when she would sing the song, "We're never getting back together," he would say, "Yeah, nah," in Australia, then go to another country and would just use the local language. And the point is that her adaptability had people relate even more because she was talking their language. And it's really, really important if you think about that cultural context in each department when you're leading a change, when you're introducing change, if you need to adapt your language so that the context is relatable, then you should be more than willing to do that as a change leader, but even as a change manager, understanding, using the language, also consciously asking. So if you're finding that you're talking a lot to people but not listening enough, and I think this is the concept of where language is important, is that to be able to adapt your language, to take the local language to heart and embed that in the change, you need to be able to listen to feedback. And you need to be not just listen to it, you need to create a feedback loop where people will talk to you about the appropriate language for that cultural context within your organisation, or it could be with a vendor, supplier. It's important. And let me talk about some words and the difference that you hopefully will hear when you're talking and using language and thinking about the power of words, because words are extremely powerful. And thus why there are jobs out there around speech writing, especially in politics, that the right phrasing is used, that it doesn't alienate people, that it can resonate with people and it can connect with people. So let's just talk about some particular words. So the word partner, rather than another department working with another department, working in partnership, two totally different things, right? So one is more relational, one is more connected versus just working together in different departments. When talking and communicating as well in a written word when looking at a community-based organization, for example, where the culture is very relationship-based, where it has a lot to do with people knowing each other, understanding each other, being like a family. Then when you're communicating, if you're communicating, say, an IT system implementation, you should phrase it in the way of this supports all of us as a connected community in this organization, as a team, as a family. And this technology will help us to be able to focus more on our community that we serve. And so even talking about community that we serve sits that in that cultural context. If it's non-for-profit in a community-based organization, these are the things and the languaging that can be really important, that if you're a change practitioner going into a small organization or a small community-based organization, that if you become too corporate, it becomes a little bit sterile in its feel. People feel like you don't understand them because of the language you're using or the language that the leader's using, which is not typical language that they would use. And it can be impersonal. And that means that there's no warmth in that. And so people can't connect when there's no warmth in the message and nothing that they can relate to. And if you're doing and running a big transformation piece, that becomes even more important, that you've identified in the culture what is the right languaging based on, or think about the country that you're in essentially, and the organization that you're working with and for. And having moved across multiple organizations, each have its formal, this is what we stand for, but then you get a sense of whether the organization is quite family oriented, quite connected because of the longevity of people who've been there. Could be because of the industry, that a lot of people are really genuinely connected, or whether it's corporate and whether it's a bit more impersonal, a bit more cerebral potentially, and whether you bring some tangibility around warmth because of the change that you're bringing in, especially if it's HR oriented, etc. Also consider from a language perspective that if you're running through a HR restructure or a compliance type program, language is really important around how you're both coaching the leaders, but also the language that you're using has to be technically correct. And especially in restructures where there could be legal ramifications, if not phrased appropriately, it could cause confusion, it could cause angst and stress. And so you really want to be clear with the leaders or whoever's communicating the message, HR business partners, that it is clear and that certain words are used and certain words are not used. And I've done that before around a bit of a, we use these words, we don't use these words in this context. It could also be, and I want to talk about context of language because I've talked about the cultural aspect to it, but also you could leverage language in an organization to align to your change. If there's been a project, program, or a change that has gone out before your change being introduced, which has been successful, you can reference that and build and connect language to that change to continue that story. Alternatively, if there's been a bit of a disaster, and there could have been a program called, Elevate, Accelerate, there's a lot of that language that gets used. And if you're coming in fresh to an organization, you do need to understand the history so that you don't use the same word language that could trigger people and have them relate to your change in a negative way. One of the other examples I think about around context was I did work on a smaller change, I guess, around a recruitment system at one stage. And when looking at naming that recruitment system, we're going to run a bit of a competition for that name back in the day. What I realized though, and this was one of my first kind of real change roles, was that there was a piece of technology we were introducing, but there was a paper-based, I guess, process, quite manual process that used to run, but it did have a banner that it ran under. So that weekly newsletter, recruitment newsletter, had a brand, and I realized that I should be using that brand for the system because essentially the system was going to replace the very manual process that was already in existence. So I didn't need to create another brand. I wanted to adopt the existing brand across onto the technology so that everyone knew it was the same thing as the same system. It had the same purpose, but of course it was all automated. And so it made it very, very different. So sometimes that context is critical to understand, and you don't need to necessarily change things if everyone has a positive brand recognition. For, in that case, it was recruitment. And so they knew that there was a weekly recruitment newsletter, for example, that used to get sent out. And by actually transitioning that onto the system, then I was just like, oh, okay, now I look on that system. So we reused the brand we didn't need to change it. And I think sometimes people do like to change things just for the sake of changing them, or, oh, it's new, let's launch something new. But in some ways you can piggyback on something that's working really well because the team had a great reputation. This was just a good enabler. And it meant less disruption to those who had been seeking and looking and using that quite manual vehicle. It just made their lives easier. So you don't always have to change the brand when it comes to change. So understanding context of language, making sure you're adapting the language, and really how well you use the power of words and positioning is going to have a lot to do with how well you listen and how well you've surveyed the landscape. And you may have surveyed the landscape internally, but I also encourage you to survey the landscape externally when it comes to brand, because sometimes when major programs get launched, people go onto Google, they Google it, and it might come up with a negative association in the zeitgeist external to your organization, and that can harm your branding internally as well. Always making sure that when you're using language, you're using words that are inclusive, so not in any way derogatory in context, and in derogatory if you're working for a global organization, making sure it's a word that can endure across each area, or that you're tailoring per domain that you're going to from a global context as well. So you might have to create 3 or 4 brands if you haven't done your due diligence around translation across different regions. So ensure that you do that as well. I have heard many horror stories about not doing that broader investigation or research to validate a byline, a brand, when it comes to change in an organization. Because remember, people love to poke holes at change. They like to be cynical about programs. And so you want to avoid giving anyone fodder for making a joke of a change or a transformation that you're looking to roll out. And that is part of that due diligence. So language is important. When I talked about you and your language that you use, you are going to be showing through the language you use whether you're a collaborator or a controller of change. Now, I always like to encourage facilitation, change facilitation, which is collaborative in all of its approach. I often hear, unfortunately, in some of the change language that people use, more of a change control aspect. And even change management in some ways gives a bit of a false sense that I, as an individual coming onto a program or facilitating change, is going to manage change. I don't manage change, I facilitate change. And change facilitation is a different thing, but some people won't want facilitation because they want someone to do stuff. Facilitation does not mean you don't do stuff. So I guess language in and of itself gives an interesting challenge, but change facilitation and collaboration is where questions are asked, where information is received and provided. It's a two-way conversation when it comes to collaboration. There are feedback loops all the way and adaptation that happens. Change control is, here's a plan, you must do it this way. This is what this is called. I think I've got a great idea, so it's I, versus we, us, together. And that language that can be used consciously or unconsciously is going to show you whether you're a change facilitator or a change manager and controller. So if you're wanting to be a change facilitator but you find yourself being very much in that control space, then there are belief systems that are probably driving that. Possibly some insecurities about your ability to drive change, so therefore having more control makes you feel more comfortable. But you will be denying people the right to collaborate with you, and I don't think that's often the intention of a change manager or someone who takes on that role. I think the intention is to help facilitate change, and therein lies the challenge, right? So being able to reflect, being able to break down the beliefs that you've got, which drive your need to have control versus to facilitate. And language is just one of those entry points which can help reflect that. And I'm sure that over many years of experience that you will gain in this area, or even not even in this area, but the area of your expertise, you've probably been present to observing language of others where you can really tell their value system. So words do matter, and it's important that you're conscious of it. And if you're looking to create a collaborative environment, think about the language you use, which either supports that or denies that from happening. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. It just struck me this week around language and the importance of language in everything that we do. I hope that some of the insights I've provided or examples I've provided has you reflect on where you're at currently with a change, language you're using, things that you might want to unpack for yourself. And come to myvirtualchangemanager.com. We always have a lot going on there, and sign up for our newsletter so you can stay in touch and stay across what is going to make the difference in change and how we can all together be change catalysts for a different way of thinking, a different way of learning, and certainly a value-based and people-based way of introducing change in an organisation, company, or even within your team. Hope you have a great day, and remember that change matters because your people, your organisation, and you all matter.